Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 53 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. As you can hear by this strong vocal performance from your host, Neelan, I am back in full force.
We had only one good week, boys.
That's right. Well, no. The opposite of that is right. Which
That's
is
not right.
All the best weeks are here to come forevermore every third week. Okay, with me, as always, are my two co-hosts, Mark and Kellen.
Hey.
How are you guys doing?
Good.
So very good.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Feeling strong.
You ready to play second fiddle to the one true host?
Second fiddle.
Yeah. Second and third fiddle. You guys figure out who's who.
I'm first fiddle. You can say whatever you
well,
want.
one of the options.
I don't know where the vote's at right now, but I'm gathering a strong support on Discord.
I
have my own
think you're
private-
overestimating your support
Yeah.
on Discord.
I have a private area that you guys aren't allowed
Oh,
in,
wow.
so where I'm
Whole private
amassing.
channel.
Yeah, I got a party boat the channel before Mark.
Speaking of the Discord, this is a good time to mention that we have a Discord. So it's been running for just over a week now.
It's rocking and rolling.
It's in full swing. We have a thriving community talking about board games. You can check that out at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. If you're not familiar with Discord, it's just a simple-to-use chat program that runs on whatever mobile phone you have, whatever desktop computer you have. Come talk to us there. Also, as always, we love getting your reviews for the podcast. If you want to send us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Facebook, please do that. We'll read it out in the podcast. We've done this in the past. We love doing it, so please send them in. Otherwise, let's get right into the topic of this week's episode, which is going to be a bit more philosophical. We're going to be talking about objectivity in board game design. Can a game be objectively good or bad?
This is a bit of a rehash for Discord users, as Neelan and I got into a fight over the weekend.
Uh-huh.
He was in San Diego vacationing, and I just didn't want him to have a good time. So
Yeah, so there was like a preview of this that's already played out briefly on the Discord, and we'll be sort of debating it in full swing tonight. Before we get to that, as we always do, let's talk about the games that we've been playing. We'll start with Kellen.
So we wanted to give a shout out to a game that we have played a few times. This is Peterson Games of Cthulhu Wars. Their new game will be on Kickstarter by the time you are listening to this, and that game is Hyperspace. Hyperspace is a 4X Alien Cthulhu Wars-like game that is $300 for the full pledge, so we'll just start there. But that has 25 unique civilizations in that $300 pledge. So a 4X game, for those who aren't familiar, is explore, expand, exploit, exterminate. So this is sort of a classic video game genre where you start in one corner of the map, you're moving around the board, you're building ships, you're researching technology, and you're trying to kill the other players and mine the resources that are available to you. What makes Hyperspace interesting is the aforementioned 25 different factions. So the version of the game that we played only had 4 of these factions, but even with just the 4, there's quite a bit of asymmetry between them. There's some super funny where one of the factions has friendship track, and basically, you know, if you ever have to give out rewards to other players, if you don't give rewards to that player, they give you a friendship token, and that changes your sort of allegiance with them, and different things happen. So there's quite a lot of silliness with Hyperspace. I was perhaps most excited for this game out of any game I was going to see in 2019, given my love of Cthulhu Wars. I think there's a lot to like in Hyperspace, but I'm overall still on the Cthulhu Wars hype train, and maybe not recommending Hyperspace. I think it's a good game, and you should definitely check out the Kickstarter page if this sounds interesting at all. But I would 100 out of 100 times recommend Cthulhu Wars over Hyperspace. What did you guys think of it?
Yeah, I mean, I only played it the one time. I may not have as fully formed an opinion as you, but yeah, I would say of the two games, Cthulhu Wars is certainly the one I prefer. I was looking for maybe a Cthulhu Wars in space. I don't know. I think that's what I was looking for. Something, a Cthulhu Wars in space. This promised to be a little bit maybe shorter. Was that
Definitely
right?
shorter.
Yeah. And it turned out shorter than any play of Cthulhu Wars I've been a part of. But it didn't have the same maybe highs and lows. The asymmetry is interesting, and I guess maybe we were limited because we were limited to a few factions. But it just didn't feel as swingy is not the right word, but the asymmetry didn't feel as breathtaking, maybe to put it that way. Also, it's a race to 15 points to trigger the end game, and it felt like at least the first 10 points were sort of on rails because you get a lot of those initial points by going up tracks.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think this is actually my chief criticism and what we've talked about is that so many of the mechanisms are quite interesting and quite quick, and I'm fully on board.
Yeah.
But how you actually score points, there are 3 tracks that you move up. And so 9 or 10 of your victory points every game out of 15 will be the same. If you research 4 times, you get to the end of that track. If you explore 4 times, you get to the end of that track. If you battle 3 times, you get to the end of that track. And that's 9 out of 15 or 10 out of 15 of the victory points.
Yeah.
So no matter what you do, you can't specialize. You can't ignore one of those tracks and win.
Okay. And that's been your experience in your multiple
That's
plays?
correct.
Yeah, okay.
And that's been most of the test pilot's experience. It's similar to Cthulhu Wars, right? Because in Cthulhu Wars, the Euro action point engine that powers it is quite strategic.
Yeah.
And then the game itself feels more like a dudes on a map, crazy, ridiculous.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that tension between those two is what's so fascinating about Cthulhu Wars and why I have previously said I'm surprised it works as well as it does.
Right.
And Hyperspace feels like it has all the right trappings and then gates you a little bit with these victory points. And then, as Neelan may or may not bring up right now, there is a event secrets deck that also has some of the rest of the victory points in it with very swingy events that don't line up with the victory point track.
Right.
Or don't feel in line with it.
Exactly. It's a game about, as with any 4X game, about hammering in how you're going to play it, and then the secrets deck sort of just swings you in these wild directions that just felt a little bit incongruous to me. I think also, if you would say at the outset, Cthulhu Wars in Space, that's a game that immediately is going to interest me, but there is an intricacy to the design of the factions in Cthulhu Wars that, like you said, Mark, I thought was lacking a little bit from the factions. Hyperspace feels a little bit closer to me, a step in the direction of something like a Cosmic Encounter. And I mean that in a good way, because the appeal to me of Hyperspace is I want to try every faction in that game. Every one of them has a slight little weird, wacky gimmick that feels completely, almost like Sidereal Confluence. Just like a little twist that doesn't feel like anything else in the game, and you just want to see them all. Especially if you're talking about 25 of them. There's so much variety in there that you just want to try every single one of them. But I don't feel like I do in Cthulhu Wars I'd want to revisit any one of them. I wouldn't want to explore these sort of different strategic options with each of those factions because it just felt a little bit looser, a little bit just less tightly designed.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things about this is that if any of this sounds interesting to you, $69 gets you 4 of the base factions, some cool minis. It's a space game. There's a lot of coolness going on. It's not Cthulhu Wars, but Cthulhu Wars is $200 and quite a bit more intricate than what Hyperspace is going for. So if you're more into the space theme, and it is basically Cthulhu in space, they're all weird cosmic horror.
Right.
It's not
the minis are about as sort of horrific as Cthulhu in terms of their aesthetic.
I'm pretty sure one of them is Cthulhu in one of the expansion races. So that is Hyperspace by Peterson Games. Honestly, I wish from the very bottom of my heart that I was giving a more resounding, glowing recommendation here. And I will play Hyperspace more because I want to get there. But, I can't in good faith shoot that out into the airwaves.
Right. But we all agree it's a solid game.
It's definitely solid.
Yeah.
It's not Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea.
Right. It's definitely worth investigating when the Kickstarter hits.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mark,
yes.
Can you take us to the next game?
So I played, quote unquote, Gùgōng, which is the new game by Andreas Steding, he of Hansa Teutonica fame. So Gùgōng is a card-driven Euro, and what you're doing is you have a hand of cards from 1 to 9, and there are different places on the board where you can play these cards. And if you play a card of a higher value than the card currently on the spot, you get to activate the location you're playing and a bonus action.
Mm-hmm. And you get to do that for free.
Right. And yes, that's right. You get to do it for free. You can activate bonus actions if you play a equal to or lesser card, but you have to pay workers, which are a resource that is at a premium. And this is all in an effort to move up a number of different tracks that are on the board and ultimately score victory points. It's got an interesting thing where there's this one track that is in the center of the board, which is you're moving up this, what is it called? The Stairway to Heaven or something?
It's
Stairway.
Led Zeppelin, the Stairway to Heaven.
Right.
It's the Temple of Eternal Glory.
Right.
It's got some sort of very exotic name.
So it is the spot that confers the least benefits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's actually no benefits, no points or anything.
But you need to have got to the top of this track, or if the game ends and you haven't gotten to the top of the track, you are not eligible to win. So that's an interesting thing. It's been used in a couple games, but I've always liked something like that. So very hot Euro. A lot of people are interested because of the pedigree. It's got a little bit of a ZhanGuo thing, which I was looking forward to because ZhanGuo has the same sort of play a card, and if it's higher or lower, you can get another benefit. I am a little hesitant to give a review because a lot like, what was the other game that had a terrible...
Gods of Atlantis?
Yeah, yes, exactly. A lot like Gods of Atlantis, I had what I think is probably the worst game of Gùgōng that you could mathematically have.
This was rough.
It was real bad.
Watch.
It was a real bad game.
Not to sort of over, but you were 50% behind other players.
Yeah,
it was rough.
Yeah. I was up to scratch. So I'll leave it to Nealon to give the more thought out and fair review. I will just say, and I'll hop in, but I'll just say that when I played Guards of Atlantis, even though I had a terrible game of it, I knew playing that game that it had something that it was really interesting. I'm not sure with Gùgōng.
I get that impression that even despite you're not enjoying it, it also didn't feel like something that was necessarily resonating.
Yeah,
strongly.
it seemed like a good Euro.
Yeah.
But again, I've seen the card thing with ZhanGuo, and I just wasn't sure if there was, is this, do you feel like this is an exceptional Euro?
Yeah, I certainly don't. It's a game that I really, really liked. I think some of the mechanics were pretty novel to me, and I think from talking to you about it afterwards, something like the cloud climbing mechanic was something you said that ZhanGuo uses. Ra apparently uses as well.
The thing that Saint shares with Ra is, in Ra, when you bid for a lot, the bidding token you put down becomes part of the next.
Got it.
Next
okay,
slot.
yeah,
So,
which is interesting because as you play your card to the board, that is then the card that other players
right. If there's a 2 card on the board and you play an 8 on it, yes, you've placed a higher card on, and therefore you're going to activate more powers. But you're leaving that 8 for somebody else to take, and also you're taking the 2 for the next round. So now you've got a lower set.
Yeah, that is interesting. But that mechanic, I thought, at least to me, having not seen it, I thought was quite clever.
Yeah.
Because it has exactly that thing you're describing, where you're both setting up for your subsequent round and sort of trying to cleverly use the cards without jumping too far ahead, right?
Yes.
It also has this thing where the 1 beats the 9, which wraps on. So there's some considerations there.
Sure.
The way that the board is designed is most of the actions, it's sort of spread about 7 different sort of action spaces, and they feel quite disparate. I think 2 of them are linked to each other in that there's where you're building the Great Wall is somewhat linked to this other track called the Intrigue, but otherwise they're quite separated from each other, which is in a way was one of the things I found the most interesting about it, because they almost felt like these little distinct games that were sort of playing.
It felt like Trajan in that way.
Interesting.
A collection of mini games.
Yeah, okay. I've heard it compared to, is Great Western Trail like that as
I've
well?
Never played
okay, never mind. Yeah. But so that I found really interesting, but at the same time, to some extent, it's biggest detriment, because without those games being linked together, you might feel like you can entirely ignore some of them. And to some extent, I think that's true. I think some people have said, the element of collecting jade that you may or may not want to do. But I'm not convinced that you can necessarily get away with ignoring more than 1 or 2 of them wholesale, which is interesting to me, because it does feel like you're just competing on multiple different fronts with everyone. And I like that. I don't think necessarily the strength of any of the individual little mini games, as it were, was especially compelling. Some of them were just literally tracks you were sort of advancing along.
Right.
I think if some of those had been slightly stronger, or maybe sort of removed entirely, I might have felt stronger about the whole experience. But it's definitely an interesting game that I'd want to go back to more. One of the things that's sort of hard to dispute is that the way that the art and the theme works together, I thought was quite clever and actually quite involved, in that you're bribing officials at each of these locations by giving them gifts which are better and better gifts than the person before you. It had a very sort of distinct sense of place, for lack of a better word, and that it felt quite evocative of the theme for me, and the art, I think, carried it a lot of the way.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to play. I did not want to play it after that first game,
bet.
but I do want to play it again. I just don't see what it has in it that would set it apart from other Euros.
I think that's fair. I think of the Euros I've played, and certainly the ones I sort of was excited for in the last few months, being sort of Coimbra, Teotihuacan, Gùgōng. Gùgōng is the one I see myself going back to the most, but it's still not quite living up to my favorites in the similar weight.
Yeah.
Question of the day: would Callan Gùgōng?
We debated this a little bit. I suspect you might like it, but it's still very quite victory point salad-y.
How did you like ZhanGuo? Because I think you played ZhanGuo recently.
That was rough, man.
Was it?
That was so opaque. I almost gave up halfway through.
I
wouldn't describe Gùgōng as opaque? Is it guy?
It isn't opaque, but I think the games
Similar
are
enough.
pretty similar.
Okay.
I do think
I
they're
did
very
win, so
Okay, right. And this is a little inside baseball, so this may be a little bit too detailed in this game. But one thing that bothered me about it, and I'd be interested to see like what the forums have to say about it. So you have these workers that are a very precious resource, at least early in the game. And one thing you can do is you can get what's like a double worker.
Oh, right.
So it's like a worker that, in terms of when you replenish your supply, when you replenish this worker, it counts as 2. And whenever you place them on the board, it counts as a double worker placement action, which is quite strong in this game. I felt like there were too many opportunities to, and maybe it was the players we were playing with because we're playing with a guy who's good at exploiting these kinds of things.
Systems, yeah.
But there were a lot of times where he would play his double worker and make a really strong move and
Immediately get
the worker back,
Yeah.
and then play him again, and it just felt like that ability to get the double worker
Right.
back was maybe too strong, or it just sort of felt like it warped the game a little bit.
Right. There were definitely specific times where I was sort of doing a similar thing with the wall action, which it required 2 to complete. So I would put my double worker down as one thing. Then immediately get the benefit to get it back because that's linked to the track that allows you to get a worker back.
Right.
And then on my next turn, I just do the
Play the
same
double
thing
worker,
again
yeah.
and like fill the wall every single round. And that you're right. I thought even at the time that felt weird, despite the fact that I was exploiting it. But I wonder about that.
Yeah, I'd like to play again. I mean, and to be fair, the reason that the Great Wall spot could be exploited was because I was playing it so terribly.
That's true. Yeah. You sort of were half filling the wall
I was
for the
basically,
entire
I was basically
game.
like,
The one thing I will say as well is that it's quite not quick necessarily, but I mean for a medium-ish heavy, not a heavy, but medium to heavy Euro, it played in 90 minutes.
Yeah,
which,
for sure.
Which I think once you got that down to about an hour, is probably one of the fastest Euros I know of that way, at least. I'm
curious. I'd like to look at like maybe some 9 and 10 reviews on BGG and just see what
people are
what people are saying. Yeah, like I said, I'm sure this is a solid Euro. I just don't know what would make it exceptional.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of with you. I like Teotihuacan. I'm not feeling as excited about it compared to like other games in my collection.
You did stumble upon, Mark, one of my favorite things in recent years, which is 7 blunders, where you play 7 wonders but try to score the lowest possible score that you could ever get.
Yeah, right.
And so your statistically lowest score, I'd love to find a Euro game about tight worker placement,
right,
where everything you do in the game scores you 1, 2, or 3 points,
right.
And then play with a group of players where you're actually trying to score the worst.
That's funny.
And so you don't want to get the wood, or you don't, because suddenly you're going to have to turn something in that you don't want.
Right. Have you ever played Last Will?
I haven't played it, but I've always wanted to.
Yeah, this isn't exactly what you're talking about, but Last Will, the idea is that you have inherited a bunch of money and you're trying to lose it all. You're trying to be the first to zero. It's funny because that throws you off because you're trying to buy high and sell low. It like flips everything on its head.
You out.
Yeah, and I couldn't get it. I couldn't get like a hold of it just because of that whole weird.
You're too counter your natural instinct.
Yeah, right. You're right. Exactly. That's right. Exactly.
Too
like
good of a
math
trader.
trade gone horribly wrong. But yeah.
Anyway. That's Gùgōng, I guess.
Yeah.
The other game that Kellen and I played this past week is Wingspan. This is a super hot. Yeah, that's musical.
You did a better Arrested Development job.
Sorry. Yeah, this is a super hot game right now. Probably anywhere you look, you see people talking about Wingspan. So to set this up, this is a game designed by Elizabeth Hargrave. It is produced by Stonemaier. That is Jamie Stegmaier's company.
Yeah, I didn't even know the name of Jamie Stegmaier's company.
Oh, it's just the Stegmaier company.
Jamie's.
Yeah, Jamie Inc. I think that's worth mentioning because it definitely has a very Stonemaier feel to it, and we'll probably come back to that in the later parts of the episode. Wingspan is a game about collecting birds, basically. You are, for whatever reason...
Kidnapping them.
Yeah, for whatever reason, you're kidnapping these poor birds and collecting them in one of 3 different habitats. The habitats correspond to one of 3 different actions, and the birds are represented by this massive deck of about 200 beautifully illustrated bird cards. One of the things I'm probably going to be stressing throughout this is how beautiful this game is. We've spoken about the production values of Scythe. This is one thing Stonemaier certainly does not get wrong. The production values for this are beautiful. Every single card in the game is unique and has a uniquely illustrated bird note, which is kind of incredible to me. Each of these birds has a different power associated with them, and as you sort of collect them into your 3 different habitats, they sort of form these consecutive rows. When you then take the action of that row, you then activate your birds in reverse order, forming almost like the sort of like assembly line machine that you're creating. So both the action is getting powerful and you're getting these consecutive actions that then trigger. And that's basically the game. The game plays over 4 rounds. You have a reduced number of actions as the game progresses. So your last couple of rounds are your most powerful because you've set up this powerful sort of machine in front of you, but you have less time to sort of fire it off. What did you think about Wingspan?
Well,
Kevin?
in many ways, a lot of people have been saying it's terraforming Mars light.
Yeah, I've heard the Gizmos comparison, I think, on Stone Mayor's website even.
Baby's first engine builder, I
Yeah.
might say. And that's not even necessarily a pejorative.
No, I think that's pretty fair.
Wingspan is, as Neelan mentioned, so pretty. And I love the theme. I love them for even just saying, yeah, we're not going to put a generic fantasy theme on this. We're going to try something else. And the different birds have different, it has how big they are on it, and that could correspond to some of the bonuses in the game.
I believe like that literally has their Wingspan printed on them, and that might trigger some cards, yeah.
So from a functionality, from a flow perspective, everything flows. I see who this game is for. It's not for me, but I get it. I enjoyed it. I think the different powers in Wingspan are very tame. It's very much iterative. One bird lets you draw one card, and one bird lets you draw two cards. And the bird that lets you draw two cards is worth one less victory point than the bird that lets you draw one card. So everything builds off of it. One of my favorite things was building a row of actions that worked in conjunction with each other, because one part of your engine wasn't interesting. One bird wasn't enough. But when combined with one other bird or two other birds, made a satisfying little engine that you could get going, and then everyone else at the table is going, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
That seems a little too strong. So it has just these vague echoes in my mind of games that I love substantially more, like Glory to Rome and Innovation.
Right, and I was going to say exactly the same thing, because whenever we talk about innovation, we've spoken about this idea of finding these combos and just like pushing that button repeatedly. And that's what Wingspan is about. You build your machine, and then you hit that action over and over again. And it's almost designed to give you a round where you're just hitting that button for the last couple of rounds. But I think the combos you pull off are, like you say, much more tame than in a game like Innovation. It feels like a little bit of a game of just like increments. Oh, I've set up a school engine, so I get 3 points, and now I get 4 points, and then on the couple of, and you just keep doing that over and over again. Whereas in Innovation, you feel like you're wrecking someone on the other side of the table, right? This is not a game where you can wreck someone on the other side of the table. It's specifically designed to prevent that. It's a game that the word I keep coming back to is it's so inherently pleasant. It's a game that you could easily introduce to someone, and it's an aesthetic, pleasant experience that no one's going to feel that hurt by at the end of. But at the same time, because all of the edges have been shaved off, I personally don't feel that excited by it at the end of my games of it either. I think it has a place in my collection. Like, having recently played with my girlfriend, she likes it a lot, and that's not something I was expecting, because it's a medium weight game. It's heavier than most games she's played. But again, the experience of it was something that she, by the end of the game, really sort of found herself enjoying, like building this machine and sort of, firing it off. One of the largest problems I have with it design-wise is this stack of cards is massive, right? And the ways in which you're allowed to sort of acquire cards from it is almost semi-random, to the extent that you're sort of hoping to find the parts you need to make your machine work. It's almost like, oh, I know the perfect gear I need here, so I'm going to stick my hand in and hope I get it, right? And that doesn't feel satisfying, because either someone gets the cards they need and makes a good machine, like I felt you did in our game, Kellen, or you're just sort of stumbling with cards that sort of half fit together and it doesn't quite come together at the end.
What I will say about Stegmaier is that he makes games that have the illusion of interactivity in them, but they actually don't. And the way that you collect resources in this game is you roll dice, and then everyone takes one, and once there's only one choice left, you're allowed to re-roll those dice. But almost every bird card you have in your hand needs 2 or 3 different resources, and it almost never came up, or it didn't ever come up, where we were deliberately blocking each other. In a 2-player game, perhaps there is a little bit more of that, but it felt like that was the mechanic that was designed to say, hey guys, this game is interactive.
Yeah.
Except it's not really, and it's just another source of randomness.
Totally. And that didn't come up even in the 2-player game I had, but I could see that being, and again, still early days on this game, I can see that becoming more important as you know what another player is relying on for food, right?
What I will say is that I want to support Wingspan. Jamie has said that the plans for the game are to release new expansions featuring different parts of the world and the birds that come from that place. This is so cool.
Yeah.
And what I'm hoping for is that maybe one of them he'll allow to either be a little wackier, a little more off the rails, a little more interactive with the other players at the table. And by putting that into one expansion, you could maybe hide it from the general players who actually want that game that's just pleasant, as you mentioned. And for me, that would be the switch that would go from, hey, yeah, I'd be happy, I'd be fine to play it, to I would buy it and the expansion immediately.
So you feel like you're potentially that close. You feel like this is one Kellen expansion away from being a game you would jump at.
Absolutely.
Okay,
100%.
cool.
I mean, I do. I love the theme.
Yeah,
the artwork's
that's clear.
amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, this rule book has a linen finish.
Right, yeah.
Like, we should just stop right now so you can just run your hands over it.
Right.
I'm not
roll it
even
through my
needling.
fingers.
Yeah, saying that.
Yeah.
So I'm amazed at how well they execute games.
Yeah.
There's just no question about that.
I think the strength of Wingspan right now is for us at least is in the system and seeing where they go with that. I trust, given how wacky some of the expansions got for Scythe, that we could potentially get there. But yeah, not necessarily a game that is going to be for us right now, but definitely a game that I think if a very firmly medium, quite accessible Euro sounds appealing and sounds like something you would have room for in your life, that I would heartily recommend. That is Wingspan. That's going to seg pretty nicely into
Seg on the pod.
Yeah. That's actually just a mistake of mine. I say seg by mistake when I mean to say segue. I didn't realize segue wasn't pronounced seg. But yes, that's going to segue, sorry Callan, very nicely into our next section, our feature topic, which is about sort of this idea of, should games be for everyone? Are games objectively good or bad? If we say, for example, that Wingspan is not for us, does that make it a bad game?
What a loaded
I've
beta
set
question.
you up.
Well, I just said Wingspan was a good game.
Right. No, that's not fair. That's absolutely just,
The root of this question is Zombicide and Nemesis. Specifically, Neelan, after our lackluster game of Nemesis, decided that Nemesis was not for Mark and I.
Right.
That was his comment. Like, no.
Well, this is not for you.
I did not say it like
yes,
that.
Yes, you did.
I didn't say it's not for you guys. You guys both firmly said it was not a game you necessarily wanted to play again. And I said, I can see the audience. I can see the people I might want to play this game with.
And that is surely not
and that
you.
is not Mark and Kellen. Yes, exactly. Obviously not intended as a knock against Nemesis, or even certainly not against the two of you. But this idea that a game can be for specific audiences without that necessarily being a mark against its quality, right?
Correct. And then I basically asked you to tell me, do you agree? Can a game be objectively good or bad? And you wouldn't answer the question. Simply, you waxed eloquent for paragraphs and then didn't answer it. So, we get to games like Zombicide that I just believe is bad. And, I always cite, and this will make some people upset, Marvel films as an example of things that just aren't as good as other movies, and yet people like them. And you are the defender of the people here, which is unusual.
Yeah, exactly. Voice of the people.
Given my status as the voice of the people. But in functioning as critics of board games, we have to be able to say, no, that's not good. I don't. I don't think you do.
No, I do, because we preempted some of this discussion, and we were talking about what are games I would think are objectively bad. And this is going to seem like a Weasley answer, but Monopoly is a bad game, for example. I think Risk is a bad game, but even that, there was a point in time where I thought Risk was the best game in the world. Right? A lot of this gets sort of mitigated by you trying better games and trying different experiences.
Right.
I would never say to someone that was happily playing Zombicide, you guys, this is the worst game, go out and play better games,
right,
because you don't know what their specific experiences are. I could certainly say, having played Zombicide and having played other games I think does what I like about Zombicide better than Zombicide does it, I would recommend those games instead. But who am I to say?
Yeah, right. I think for me, for a game to be objectively bad, in my eyes, it's got to be pretty much broken. I mean, there are games that like you were saying, Risk and Monopoly, I don't even know if those are objectively bad games, because I think there are games for people who just want, who is Monopoly and Risk for? Well, it's for somebody who maybe doesn't know about other board games and just wants to play something comfortable with like their kids or something. So it's perfect for them. They have no perhaps interest in exerting the time or whatever to learn a new game, even though that there are better games. I'm not even saying that Monopoly is a good game for those people, but the idea that a games can be objectively bad and that be a definition that's more than broken is tough for me to agree to.
But I would fight against even that, because I think what you're describing is someone that knows and is comfortable with Monopoly, like every sort of board gaming family in America, right? The idea that you should tell them, like, get rid of Monopoly. I know you know how to play it. I know you've played it every Christmas, but here's a game that does what it does better. Yeah, there's something there, but at the same time, I think if you're talking about a game, approaching two games from equal footing, like someone doesn't know either of these two games, which would you point them towards?
Right.
You would never recommend Monopoly.
Sure, of course.
Over
Right.
any
That's correct.
other game,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So to some extent, you could say that Monopoly is objectively inferior to most games,
right,
that you know.
Yeah, but when you're saying a game is objectively inferior, well, I guess it is objective. That feels like we're getting like somehow defining subjective in like a roundabout way. But I guess that's right. Yeah,
I guess, and I think it's weird as I'm saying that, like, that's not exactly my stance, but it's kind of this idea that, like, there are elements of Zombicide, to use your example, that I would change and do get fixed by different games, but the game experience as a whole, and certainly at the time that Zombicide came out, wasn't being replicated by many other games. This idea of these sort of hordes of zombies attacking the player. There are role-playing games or other miniature games, dungeon crawler games that do similar things, but not quite on the same scale. Does that mean that Zombicide is a bad game? I mean, I don't know. I think certainly, like I said, I would change certain mechanics to make it better. There are design decisions that I think are bad in that game, but overall the net experience is something that you're not quite replicating anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I had that list of my 646 games played, and I had it like in order, but even the games at the bottom of the list, I can definitely see people who would enjoy them. I think they're inferior games for sure, but I don't know how many of those games, even at the bottom of my games played list, I would say are objectively bad. I can't see myself saying they're objectively bad. I just, like Heroes of Land Scene Era, we all had a really bad experience, but I can see a group that would enjoy that,
So speaking of those games, I went on my Board Game Geek profile and found my 3 lowest rated games, which are all ranked 2 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what the one on Board Game Geek even corresponds to.
I think it's like broken. Like, this is not a game broken. Something along those lines.
Yeah, this is not a game, basically. So this is one step above that.
Yeah.
Actually, let me see if I can pull up the rating. So these are ranked 2, which, according to Board Game Geek, is extremely annoying, won't play this ever again.
Okay.
And then 1 is defies description
Right.
of a game.
Okay.
So my 3 are Zombicide,
Oh, wow.
Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, and Unearthed.
Unearthed. Good Lord. This has been a recurring...
Extremely annoying. We'll never play again, Neelan.
Can you not see a group that Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea they would like? You can't see a...
I mean, I could see a group that liked it because they weren't aware of 7 other games.
Really? Interesting. Because there have been Reddit threads about Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea where we've all gone in there and said, like, we did not like this game at all, and these are the reasons why we didn't like the game. And I feel like we've had, like, strong pushback.
Yeah, no, totally. And the things, but I remember, and I feel like this is something we explicitly said, maybe even on the podcast, of talking about Heroes of Land and the Sea. Is like, I couldn't imagine the group of players that would actually enjoy that. And like you, Kellen, like, I think why I had that reaction is, like, there are games that are doing this exact same thing, but quicker, more elegantly, easier to explain, sort of more beautifully in the production. And it's like, what is it about this? Why would you do this when so many other better alternatives exist?
Nostalgia for Warcraft.
I mean, that's,
and sunk cost fallacy because they overpaid on Kickstarter.
Yeah, that is a whole. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if this conversation is going to devolve into, like, there's no such thing as objectively good or bad, there's no point in having this dialogue.
Right.
Well, I think where we could sort of steer it right, is like, what are the things that we consider objectively valuable, or at least objectively measurable? Because I do think there are specific components of board game design and mechanics that I do think you can objectively talk about.
And just to be clear, I too would never go up to a group at Gen Con
Sure.
or at a game store who's playing Zombicide and be like,
Flip the table.
yeah, and be like, I'm here to educate you guys. Like, what you've been playing is horrible.
Right,
And it reminds me of film once again, where if you go to a movie and you're not enjoying yourself and you start looking around and to see if your friends are liking it, and if you're the one who doesn't like it, you don't want to be the person who, when you walk out of the theater, goes, man, that was terrible. Because you could just buzzkill someone so badly. Someone could be buzzing with the excitement and enjoyment of that.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful with how
you're saying you don't want to be that person, Khaled?
that is true. I sometimes do try to be that person. But no, I definitely don't. But I do think that we can say this game is of better quality. It does the same thing. It's quicker. It's cheaper. It's more enjoyable. It has more interesting mechanisms. And the nature of defining a top 50 games of all time list sort of says you agree with me, even if you're not saying it out loud right now.
Well, I mean, that's part of the funny thing about, like, we've just put 50 games in order, so there must be some semblance of what we think of as a metric to these games. Oh, man, but that's so deeply personal, though, right? Like, you're talking about saying that this game is a game that, because we think it has no value, that you should also think it has no value. And for that to be universally true?
Yes, obviously what we're talking about is our subjective opinion.
No, I'm not even
objective
trying to be like
versus subjective. Yes, but what I will push against you is what we frequently argue about, which is essentially moral relativism. That it doesn't. Everything can't be good or bad. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's right. When we're talking about specific things, it's art. Like, yeah, oh man, you just didn't get this painting. You know, it's a splotch. You know, a 5-year-old threw paint on the wall. Great. You know, you're playing Village. You know,
right.
like, there are these games that I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah.
That like you can't just default back to, yeah, I didn't like it, but someone might. And so specifically our argument was that you kind of put the idea out in the world that Mark and I weren't perhaps the right group for Nemesis, when I think that's entirely unfair, because we were excited to be there.
Yeah.
We were both into the theme, and we both like experiences where we all collectively share in something, and the game shit on us.
To be clear, I've said the exact same things about Nemesis. There are a lot of things that I don't like that I think make it a game that is not one that I would ever love. Not even one that I would ever necessarily even like. There are a lot of systems I think are quite busted in Nemesis.
That's bad.
That is bad.
It's bad.
Totally. And I think what I said
So
as
why
much,
are you going to give it to other people? Why do you want them to experience the badness?
Well, partly because...
You already spent the money.
Well, I mean, look, that, I'm not going to lie. That is a big part of it. Yeah, if I've got the second wave coming, I'm telling you, I'm going to...
You're going to sell it to one of your other friends?
Exactly. No.
You two
It's not
dummies.
that. It's not that. It's just that I know that having played specific games with this other group B, right?
Of dummies.
Jeez, no. But
I mean, but they are dumber than us, right?
no.
In board games.
No.
Well, then why do they like
They
Nemesis?
like different games.
They like Zombicide.
Zombicide is not a... I wouldn't call... Zombicide is not a game I like.
Is it for dumber people?
No. It's for game... Again, the thing that Zombicide does...
Just tell us we're smart. Just tell us we're smart.
No, I
Who's the
refuse
smartest?
to. I will not
We're,
say you're
we're
smart.
Mensa.
Well, you're not. You're not Mensa.
2 out of 3.
But what Zombicide provides, and again, this throws back to what we were talking about Nemesis, it provides a specific experience that is not easily replicated by other games. It's not easily replicated by more elegant, simpler, more complex, more brain-burnery games, because there's something about these sort of run at a horde of zombies, throw some dice, knock a couple of the miniatures,
explode randomly.
Exactly.
Randomly explode. Yeah.
It's a specific experience that I'm not necessarily looking for 90% of the time I play a board game.
Yeah.
But with the right people, I have enjoyed. It's kind of like we've spoken about this with other games before. We've spoken about this in for something like True Colors, right?
Yeah.
Like True Colors is 95% as good as the people you're playing it with.
Yes, that's
right.
True. Right.
Could you imagine like a group of people who you would play True Colors with and it would be a miserable experience? Yes,
absolutely.
Of course you can.
I played it with them.
But how? I mean, that to me, that is the similar argument. It provides an experience that is not going to be the same with every group of people you play it with.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to get you to admit, and I hope it's very clear, and Mark, do not edit this out, that I don't think people who like Zombicide are dumb. But in many ways, I think people who like certain games, like Monopoly, are inexperienced.
And I agree. I would absolutely agree with that. I would think that, to me, the closest we get to sort of having this argument is talking about how informed someone is, how knowledgeable someone is about the wider scope of board games.
And in some ways, who wants to lean in or lean out of the hobby?
Right.
Because there's a lot of Euro games or a lot of fantasy games where I could see someone saying, yeah, I don't want to play a game about wizards. Right? Like, I'm not... That's weird or that's too far. You know, one of the things that I always think is so interesting about film criticism is the more movies you watch, the weirder their tastes get almost entirely.
Right.
Yeah.
It feels like they no longer understand the voice of the people.
Yeah. That's true, I think, with any cultural criticism. Yeah.
And so my tastes in board games, I feel like, are more along that line. Not that I think I have some elevated critical opinion, but it's just... I've played hundreds of them, so I feel like I'm seeking unique experiences or things that can't be replicated anywhere else.
Right, and to some extent, like this, we were just talking about this with Gùgōng, right? It's a perfectly fine Euro game, but we've all played better games. And that's not a position that everyone necessarily has the correct experience or perspective to appreciate, because something like Wingspan, right? It's a game that I would recommend to most people, but not a game that we've just both admitted, at least, that we don't love. It's not a game that's going to excite us as much as other sort of similar types of games. It might get there eventually, but it still has a broad appeal that's hard to deny. Does that mean that those people, are dumber than other people? No, but it's like, I'm comfortable saying that unless you were willing to really dive deep into the hobby and find games that are going to very specifically capture mechanics and experiences that are to taste that I don't know about you, I'm comfortable saying Wingspan will probably get you close. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, once again, the specific argument that triggered this entire dialogue was you telling us that we weren't the right audience for Nemesis, of which I completely disagree with.
I mean, I would like to read back that, because I'm not. That's not sounding like something I would say.
You were sick. You were.
Yeah, exactly. I can barely remember. Yeah, exactly. I was
couldn't
spewing
say
all
anything.
sorts of mad things.
Couldn't say anything out loud, so he was just typing like a madman.
Exactly. What I do think is true is that there are groups of people that I think I would enjoy and would enjoy Nemesis more than the three of us.
But I do believe part of your subtext and part of what you won't say out loud is those types of people who will like Nemesis are people who are okay with worse game mechanisms.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's fair.
And so that pushes Nemesis somewhere not as objectively, quote unquote, objectively, subjectively good to not so good.
If your main principal interest is solid, tight mechanics, then yeah.
I'm very principled.
But if you're looking for, and the thing is, again, there are not many games that recreate this sort of broad thematic experience in the vein of Alien that Nemesis does. If you want a game that recreates Alien, I can't think of a better game than Nemesis. Right? But it's not a game I would recommend on the strength of its mechanics. I actively hate some of the mechanics in Nemesis.
Right.
But I would still play it again for the hope of recreating the thematic experience that I still want to believe it can provide in the right circumstances. But
I just think what's funny and what's interesting about this discussion is the easy thing to do is, there are objectively bad games. It's Monopoly, man.
Right.
Because no one listening to this is going to defend Monopoly.
Right.
But in Monopoly, if we look at its origins, was actually a teaching aid.
Totally. It's designed to be a bad game, right?
To not be fun, to literally teach you about capitalism. And so, why do we make the podcast, man?
I think where I specifically cite something in Monopoly is that I, for one, can't think of a specific mechanic in Monopoly that, in the wider scope of board games, I would consider still good. Like, the Monopoly does this one thing that is still worth thinking about or worth revisiting.
Common game mechanisms that are cited as bad design. Roll to move.
Sure.
What do you guys think about that?
Generally not good, but it has been done good in some newer games.
Do you have an example?
I mean, one that pops to mind is Formula D.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, I think that's probably the classic good roll and move, which is a racing game where you can change gears, and the die that you roll depends on how high up on the gear that you're at. And the dice are sort of mitigated because what would normally be a 20-sided die only really goes up from like the 6 to 20. So there's some mitigation there. So some of the swinginess of roll to move games is lessened in that way.
It marries this with press your luck in a smart way where you don't necessarily want to roll high. So
yeah. Exactly.
It's clever.
Another game that I keep around in my collection is Magical Athlete,
right?
Which is a game where you draft magical beings with special powers, and then each round you get to choose which one you're bringing out, but the rounds get more and more valuable as you go, and then you're just rolling, and you have to do your power if you can do it. It's a very zany, silly, fun game, but when you choose to use which athlete in which race, and then how those powers interact with the other powers is so funny. That roll to move is in there, but it's more you roll the die and then you start cursing at each other.
Right, yeah.
And that's what makes the game fun.
Right.
Yeah. Have you played Magical Athlete with us?
Yeah, I think I played it once with you. I don't really
silly.
remember it very well, but I remember it being ridiculous.
It has the worst graphic design.
Yes.
The board is straight out of MS Paint.
They're like the standees are awful, right?
The standees are off. I like the little illustrations, but man, Magical Athlete.
Yeah.
Speaking of specific mechanics, and this is something that we were talking about the Discord as well, actually, but player elimination, as pertains to Nemesis especially, is another very hotly debated mechanic where we're mostly of the opinion that early player elimination, especially in a long game, is a straight-up bad mechanic. But I've heard people in talking about Nemesis saying they don't mind it.
Player elimination is a hard one, right? Because it gets a bit meta.
Yeah.
Because if your goal at the game night
Is to play the game.
Is for everyone to have fun, then I would say yes, player elimination is bad.
Okay.
But what player elimination does is it increases the stakes of what you're doing. And so Diplomacy, probably my favorite game that features player elimination, is the friendship killer. You will literally be out of the game in an hour because everyone has betrayed you, and surprise, you have to leave.
Yeah.
And you have to leave, and you're very, very mad at everyone else.
Yeah.
And so the fear, the tension of being excluded from the game contributes to the negotiation, to how you might start getting a little bit more desperate than you might otherwise. And this is the polar opposite of a Euro game that's designed to make everyone feel like Wingspan.
Right.
Like
even when they're
pleasant.
behind, they might still have a
Yeah.
chance.
And even when you're behind in Wingspan, you might only be 10 points
Sure.
or 12 points down. It might feel like you're right in there in it to win it.
Yeah.
Whereas player elimination says, no, you lost, you're bad.
Yeah.
And, in Nemesis, obviously, we had that event card silliness where, Mark made a series of strategic blunders and then drew a card that killed him. So,
Right.
I have to just defend Nemesis there.
That's fair. Yeah.
There's been this trend recently towards, speaking of player elimination, to games that sort of try to mitigate it by sort of moving it towards the end of the game. Like, I think The Thing does this quite smartly, where there is player elimination, but it can only happen within the last 20 to 30 minutes of the game,
Yeah.
right? Do you think that removes the stakes entirely, or do you think that that's a smarter evolution of the mechanic in the vein of we were talking about roll and move?
I think that generally speaking, player elimination is not desirable.
Yeah.
Right? But I dislike it when a game gets too focused on that end game. There are games where you win only if this person loses and that other thing happens. And sometimes I feel like those end game states start really folding in on each other. And Nemesis is a great example. I think some of the One Night Ultimate Werewolf games, Where Words does this. I don't personally like that, but I think that's just my own preference. But, I do think that in general, if you said, is player elimination bad, is you'd have to define the goal of the game night. And that's perhaps the context of this entire discussion.
Yeah.
Because frequently, I'll read an opinion on the purpose of game night, or why are people there? And some people say they aren't even trying to win the game,
right.
which is not how we play games.
Right.
We're desperately trying to beat each other because the games, in most cases, are designed around that.
Yeah. Right.
But that is not necessarily the current modern flavor of playing games right now, I would say.
I would agree with that. There's been it seems like a shift to keeping things rubber banded, keeping players like close to, or at least feeling like they're always in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You always get a trophy, Mark, when you play a Euro game.
I earn my trophies.
Not in Gùgōng.
Not in Gùgōng. I did
Not in Guards of Atlantis.
That's true. Those are two I did not earn a trophy in.
You didn't win ZhanGuo when we played.
I didn't play ZhanGuo when you played.
Well, you were there up
spirit,
until the
you were
rules
present.
explanation
Right.
ended.
That's right.
And then you disappeared.
Yes.
To who knows where. So
That's my style.
It's interesting that, the game that I won isn't recorded in your BG Stats app.
I mean, it wasn't there. It might not have even happened.
I mean,
Who's
you
to say it didn't happen?
were
Did you
there
actually
at
win?
the end of the game.
If a game is played and I'm not there, was there even a game?
You were there for the rules explanation. Your pieces were set out, and you lost.
I
the
just,
game.
I looked,
well, you
I
didn't
looked,
lose.
I looked
won.
across the table and I just saw what the competition was, and I just said, "This is just going to be I don't want to crush this guy on a weekend. I'm just going to step away, let him have his fun, let him have his nice little win, and then I'll come back."
That's
ZhanGuo
noble, if anything.
is in your top 50 games of all time.
It is
And I won.
right because I wasn't there.
Who can say?
My app can say.
I think that's going to do it for our talk on objectivism in board games. No,
Not
I think-
objectivism.
Sorry,
that's
yeah,
a whole
that's
nother
different
thing.
thing.
We can disagree about that too, Neelan.
Right. But yeah, that's going to do it for a talk on objectivity. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. As always, please reach out to us on social media. You can hit us on Twitter and Facebook, on our email at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. Send us your questions, your thoughts, your suggestions. Come chat to us in the Discord.
Yes.
boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Otherwise, thank you as always to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. You can check them out at heartsocietymusic.com. Goodbye.
See ya.
Don't be a dummy. Neelan,
Yeah.
we got into a fight on Discord,
Mhm.
and everybody watched us.
Yeah, which is great.
And then in the private chat, you admitted that you were wrong, and you were just trying to rile up
It's weird.
our Discord audience.
I don't remember any of that.
Yeah, I have screenshots
You were
to
sick.
prove it.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
Memory.
But this you're the defender of Zombicide. Is
Right.
that what?
that's pretty much what it boils down to.
Yeah.
But-
But to be clear, as someone that doesn't think Zombicide is a good game,
So what is a bad game? Like, why do we make this podcast if there's no such thing as a bad game?
Because-
Like, if you're like, well, it could work, well, my grandma, she likes the dominoes, so it's a good game. Don't worry about it, bro.
no, but that's not it. Because I think what we do, the value of what we do, is that we are tastemakers and sort of trendsetters.
We are tastemakers.
Taste-
No, but
Tastemakers.
genuinely, because I think people would listen to the podcast, be like, "Oh, I like the way Mark talks about games. I like the way Neelan talks about games."
Oh, that's
maybe
specific.
that leave it there. But
That's strange.
but then and then you hear that person talking about another game, and it's like, "Oh, that sounds interesting. That sounds like a game I would like." Right? We're
Based
not
on-
gonna be
based on what
talking-
they've been
based on-
talking- yeah.
Exactly. Based on the context that they have from us.
Yeah.
We're not going to, whack lyrical about Zombicide, but it's not for us because and I mean by it's not for us, as in the three of us don't like it.
But then, so take it one step farther, right?
Mhm.
Is there a difference between something being bad
Yeah.
and something being not for us?
Yes.
Yes.
Of course there is.
So name some bad games.
Monopoly.
Okay, keep trying.
Okay, so what you name me an objectively bad game?
Zombicide is an objectively a bad game.
Heroes
of Land, Air, and Sea, Monopoly, in many ways Risk. Just by virtue of...
They've been done better.
Yeah,
But-
I mean, we have to... I guess, of course, objectively bad is not
This should be
true.
our podcast.
Here's where I think this
Our
gets
podcast
absurd.
should be, is there an I swear to God, our podcast
If you
should
want to
be,
go back to our deep philosophical discussions, this sounds like
because
it's
this
it.
feels like something we're talking
and
about.
we set it up in the Discord
Yeah.
as well.
That's what we're doing.
This
Change.
is
We're
it.
audible.
Yeah, Audible.
All right.
Can there be an objectively bad game? Perfect.
Well,
Boom. Don't even talk anymore. We're doing it. Let's run it.
okay, it's recording.